Item A, phased rollout plan, small group cohorts, SDC intervention, and grade levels. Staff report?
Yeah, just a quick overview before I turn this over to Associate Superintendent Harrison. At the last board meeting, we had Dr. Saylor, our Director of Special Education, present an overview of the potential to bring back special day class students onto our campuses for in-person instruction. And then we said we would bring back a plan at this meeting. We have done so, and we are also looking at kind of laying out a series of phases to bring back more and more students onto campus. That is the result of our San Joaquin County moving officially into the red category from purple, which negates any of the former guideline responsibilities of districts, such as a waiver to start to consider larger numbers of students onto campus. So as Dr. Park, Maggie Park, who is the public health official, says, she recommends that phases of rollouts of kids onto campus is the most prudent course to take. So I'd like to turn this over to Mr. Harrison, who will specifically talk to SDC plans and also a broader overview of recommendations from staff to expand cohorts of students on our campus.
Thank you.
Board President Pombo, trustees.
Welcome, Associate Superintendent Harrison.
Thank you. So to start my presentation, we received guidance on small cohort groups, which I've presented before in a couple different forums. I just want to remind the board on what that guidance was. So we are allowed to have up to 14 students and 2 adults in a classroom, and that equates to a small cohort group. That cohort group, the idea and the design for the cohort groups is to limit time and to limit exposure of students and staff so that we can have smaller cohort groups working and learning. So the first small group we talked about was SDC students, and our SDC student group coming back would involve 6 different groupings of students, all under the 16 count threshold that is set by the CDPH. Now initially we were looking at October 19th as a date, and I'll get back to that later on in the presentation. This would be followed closely by EL students and at-risk students coming back to the school sites in small groups and getting specific help and specific learning opportunities beyond the distance learning. Now, we mentioned at the last board meeting that county programs, the county special education programs, are coming back to our school sites on October 12th. Those programs are at 4 of our school sites: the high school, Lammersville, Altamont, and Wickland school sites. In my presentation, I'm also going to talk about return of other groups and other grade levels. And the return of those grade levels in a protracted return, or as our superintendent so eloquently put previously, the difference between the tortoise and the hare, and we're going to continue to be the tortoise who always wins the race. Now, all of this presentation falls under the guidance of CDPH. Everything that I'm presenting tonight is within the guidelines provided by the CDPH. So one of the things we did a couple weeks ago is we started contacting parents of SDC students and finding out their feelings and their thoughts on returning to the school site for in-person instruction. Now I'm going to explain this chart. These are results of conversations that we had with our SDC parents. So if you look at the first column, it has the grouping of students. It's pre-K, K1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, and high school. That's the normal grouping of our SDC classes. Now, if you look at the next column, that's the LVLA, or our online learning program. And those are the number of students that correspond with the grade level that want, parents who want their students to stay in distance learning for the school year. Now, we contacted these parents to find out where they are and their thoughts on their students moving to in-person instruction. The next column is the number of students by grouping whose parents want them to stay in distance learning and not return to hybrid instruction yet. And you can see the corresponding numbers. Pre-K is 5, K1 is 3, and so on. So the total hybrid in person is the next column, and those are the parents of students that want their children to return to school, get in-person instruction. Now the TBD column are parents that haven't returned our phone calls yet. And we've been calling parents for about 8 or 9 days now. The next column is the total students we're talking about. The next is the total staff. And then the final column is what the cohort size of the group would be, including adults and staff. So you'll notice there's a asterisk on the 14 under pre-K, and that's because the pre-K is going to be broken up into 2 groups in this proposal. So what are the cohorts we're looking at? As I mentioned before, preschool would be broken into 2 groups. That's at Wickland. K1 at Wickland, 2-3 at Wickland, 4-5 at Wickland, 6-8 at Cuesta, and then the 9-12 group, obviously, at Mountain House High School. So what would the school day look like for SDC Preschool? So SDC Preschool would go 4 days a week. Group 1 would be 8 to 9:30, Group 2, 11 to 12:30, with cleaning between the 2 groups. We set up the schedule this way because we wanted to keep the cohort group size manageable and small enough to not push against the size limitations that the CDPH has given us. You'll notice that the timing of the school day ends at 12:30. Students would have the opportunity to pick up a lunch and go in Group 2, and the students in Group 1, they could pick up the lunch as they normally do, and that's through the drive-through process. After 12:30, any time after that, this would be the hybrid portion of the learning, and that would be asynchronous time. And then Friday would continue, as is the practice currently. Friday would continue to be intervention prep and asynchronous learning time for the SDC preschool students. The SDC K-8 model is very similar. And these students would be attending school from 8 o'clock to noon in person, with lunch being a grab and go, as the other students would. And then asynchronous time would occur from 12:45 to 3:30. I have to apologize, there's a typo on this. The K-8 model would end at 12:30. Can you go back a slide? And the SDC preschool would end at 12. Those are typos. I apologize for that mistake. I needed to clarify that. Thank you.
Why would it be different for the second group? Would be an hour and not the first group? If you go back to the previous slide.
Yeah, if
8 to 9:30 is an hour and a half. 11 to 12:30 is also an hour and a half.
Oh yeah, you're right. I'm sorry, it's not a mistake. I was going too far forward into the next slide. I'm sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. That you're correct. That is not a typo. Thank you. So as I said, lunch would be grab and go, and then the asynchronous time would occur after lunch, 12:45 to 3:30, and then the Fridays would still be intervention prep and asynchronous time. I wanted to mention that at the top it says K-8 model. That includes 7 and 8. The next slide, if you can move the next slide. Thank you. The next slide is the high school slide. And I know this is very busy with the times on the left, but the high school will be having periods of attendance when we return to hybrid model at the high school. And the SDC students would come back to a period schedule of 1 through 4 on Mondays, Tuesdays 5 through 7 with success, and then repeated on Thursday and Friday. The difference is on Wednesday is their intervention and prep day. That's the day that the high school is doing intervention and prep for all students. You'll see a similar schedule as we look later on in the presentation for a high school model. So what are the next steps? As I said previously, we would have a tentative start date of October 19th. October 19th is the criterion date for us being in the red as a county. Having back-to-back 2-week sessions of being in red on October 19th, like Dr. Nicholas pointed out, we would be free to bring students back to the school site without a waiver. We would communicate with bargaining units. We already have had some communications with bargaining units and given them a thumbnail sketch of this plan. We need to communicate with the schedules with parents and work with them on what the schedule will look like. We need to continue to glean teacher input. And then logistics, we have to work with administration, custodial, nutrition services to make sure that our school sites are safe, that we have food for our students, and that logistically we know where students enter, where students exit, and get used to the idea of social distancing, that students have to wear a face covering, etc. So the timeline to return, like I talked about, purple became red, and when red becomes official on October 19th, if we stay in the red category, this phased-in transitional process can apply to all of our students. So we want to bring the students with most need first, and I think I kind of talked about that with SDC and our EL students and students at risk. And I'm going to go through some hybrid models that you'll probably recall from a presentation we made a while back, getting approval from the board on our hybrid models. And then the springtime goal, this is a lofty goal we hope we can achieve, is traditional in-person instruction. Now that doesn't include the LVLA or the online pathway students who have the opportunity to stay in that program for the school year. So what does a timeline look like for this transition to hybrid learning at our school sites? So it could look like TKK, students begin in-person instruction on October 26th. Now you'll note that the next line, all TKK teachers return to the school site on October 19th. One of the things we've talked about as a staff and we've talked about with our units, our bargaining units, is bringing staff back to the school site prior to the start date of students being there for live instruction. The reasoning behind this is to give staff an opportunity to A, get reacclimatized to their classroom if they have been teaching from home, B, get some training on site safety practices, procedures, how rooms are going to be cleaned, how students are going to communicate and walk around campus, and how they're going to go to recess, how they're going to go to lunch for the older grades, etc. So we've proposed an October 19th return for all TKK teachers, with the students beginning hybrid in-person instruction on October 26th. For first and second grade, we're looking at hybrid in-person instruction on November 3rd, with the teachers returning to the school site on October 26th. On October 26th. Now grades 3 through 5 would begin hybrid in-person instruction on November 30th, with all 3 through 5 grade teachers returning to the school site on November 16th. Grades 6 through 8, students begin hybrid in-person instruction on January 4th, and all grades 6 through 8 teachers return to the school site on December 16th. And just a reminder, that's the week prior to the 2-week holiday break. And then grades 9-12 would have the same schedule as the 6-8, January 4th return, with teachers returning to the school site on December 16th. So here's a visual representation of what the hybrid model schedule could look like for TK3. AB schedule, students 8 to 12 with a grab-and-go lunch with asynchronous and elective and prep time in the afternoon. B, having an 8 to 12 with a grab-and-go lunch at 12 o'clock and asynchronous electives and prep in the afternoon. Friday would maintain and still be intervention, asynchronous time, and prep, and deep cleaning time for the school site. The model for grades 4-8 is similar. This is the later end time. This is where I got confused earlier in the presentation. I apologize. A group would go 8 to 12:30, and B group 8 to 12:30 with a grab-and-go lunch at 12:30 with asynchronous and elective prep time in the afternoon. Fridays would remain the same, intervention, asynchronous prep, and deep cleaning. You'll note at the top that the hybrid model says 4-8. The next slide says hybrid model schedule 7-8 prior. The reason I included this because the board may recall that this is the model that was approved back in May, I believe it was, for hybrid models. And we realized as staff talked to site principals and talked to our bargaining units and talked to teachers, can you go back a slide, please? We realized that our staff needed more time to prep. So you'll notice each afternoon has time in the schedule for teachers to do two things. One, provide live instruction via recording or something like that, but also to prepare their asynchronous instructional lessons for the B group or the A group on their asynchronous days. Having the teachers teach all the way to 3 o'clock is counterintuitive because they don't have time in their day to prepare their lessons for the A group's asynchronous time as well as the B group's synchronous time. So that's why we changed the schedule slightly to allow for that extra teacher time in the afternoon. Could you advance? One more, please. Thank you. And then the high school, their AB schedule that was approved by the board is remaining very similar to what was presented back in, I believe it was May, with the Wednesday intervention asynchronous time still on the schedule. You'll note that there is a great deal of time up there for success or intervention time, which I believe is a boon for our students, providing extra time and extra blocks of time where students can come in cohort groups will benefit our kids that are falling behind. You'll notice here that there is a lunch on campus, and the lunch is about 50 minutes. Sorry, 45 minutes. Lunch will be spread out all over campus. We will have benches in a variety of areas around the campus. We will open another window by the C building so that there will be multiple areas for students to get lunch so we can cut down on the number of students that are in lunch lines. And remember, it's half the students that are on campus for hybrid. That's about 1,400 students. So we're talking about 700 students per day in the A or B day. So what is our hope for the spring? Full schedule in-person traditional instruction starting March 1st. That is our hope. We're hoping that that can happen. And that would be excluding LVLA and online pathway. Our next steps also include evaluate lessons learned. So what did we learn during this time when we're doing distance learning for all of our students? I think that our teachers learned a lot about instructional delivery, the blended model, how to deliver instruction via the computer. Maintenance and sanitization. We learned a lot about how we need to clean and how we need to organize our campuses and organize our kids so that we have a safe campus when it comes to the spreading of COVID-19 or anything related. And then our internal processes between HR, business, educational services, just understanding how we can adapt and shift gears when things change in a dramatic way. And I think we learned a lot in our internal processes during this time. That is my presentation. Do you have any questions?